Hello everyone watching this video. I'm Tanya, one of GoGeomatics online community managers. And today on behalf of GoGeomatics Canada, we will be having a conversation with Dave McIlhagga, the president of International Map Industry Association. Dave is also the founder of Map Sherpa, which is an active and growing digital map distribution ecosystem where Dave focuses on providing technology solutions. At IMIA, Dave leads the association's board, helps to grow memberships around the world, and establish relationships with partners throughout the mapping and geospatial industry. Let's get to know more from Dave about IMIA and the mapping industry in general. Hi, Dave. We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tanya. It's great to be here.
Great. Just to get this started, I would like to begin our conversation with knowing a bit more about IMIA as an organization and the role it plays in today's world.
Sure. So the International Map Industry Association, or IMIA, has been established back in the 1980s, originally from a lot of the print map distribution business, when there were some needs for collaboration among different companies to be able to share resources in terms of, I think, procuring product at that time, paper and other printed products. But it has evolved tremendously since that time. And today really represents a cross-section of the geospatial location and printed map sectors of our industry. So our membership is quite diverse, and we really provide, I like to think of it as a forum for us, for its members to really focus in on business issues. I think for a lot of the geo business and world, events are rightly very focused on the practitioners, the professionals, but it means that at those events, the business people are sort of the 1 in 100, and so they have to find each other out. Our industry association provides a great forum for that connection to happen at a business level and information there. Maybe a little bit, I can provide a little bit of my own a bit of story through that, sort of provides a bit of to make that a little more tangible for people. My first encounter with IMTA at the time, so this is an International Map Trade Association, when it was heavily rooted in the print business, was in 1998 actually. And I was just getting started. I'd left my work at PCI Geomatics, graduated from Carleton University geography program a year earlier. So really fresh into the business. And I saw this conference was coming to Ottawa from the International Map Trade Association. And I thought, well, what's this all about? It didn't feel like it was part of my world. I was doing web mapping at the time and consulting work. But I just thought, I got to find out what this is. And so I went, and it was fascinating. At the time, it didn't, but it was really interesting to see this whole world that was going on in the print world that seemed really disconnected from the rest of what we did in the geography, the GIS universe, you know, in terms of the spatial world. And it's funny, it planted a bit of a seed for me. And maybe 10 or 12 years later, I guess in 2012, that seed had grown a little bit, and as I was pivoting my business, I thought, well, there's this universe out there of all these people that really know how to make products, sell them, but I bet you where's the technology in that? And so I thought maybe there'd be an opportunity. But so of course I went for my own business purposes, but what I landed when I went to my first real event, when I really engaged people, it was amazing. It was a small group of people, only 100 people, but it was all the right people. You know, everybody there was senior owners of their companies, senior managers, all in my world of map business, and it was already starting to shift. And so, you know, today, 9 years after that, I went in, I knew nobody. And 9 years later, I think we have 22 members of the association we do direct business with. So it just goes to show, you know, that so to me, that was sort of that, it was an eye-opening thing. And so part of the reason I wanted to take on this role as president of the association was it was a bit of a pay it forward. I thought, you know, this is an experience I really felt every business owner or leader in the geospatial world should experience, that this opportunity to learn things that are really relevant to the business, you know, not just about the latest gadget or widget, but about how that makes an impact on our businesses. And then all those casual conversations and business conversations that can happen to forge lasting partnerships and relationships. And so that's what, as an industry association, we're really about, is making that happen. And, you know, we are evolving at this sort of, because the roots were in the printed business, there was a little bit of an assumption that this is very much about the print business. But actually now we're at about 25% of our membership are technology firms in the geospatial technology spatial sector. We have a number of companies that have very little to do with the print world, which is good. And we're seeing that shift happen right across the board. So that's a little bit about us and what we're here for.
That's amazing. I love to hear your journey that you explained, you know, being at the right spot, meeting the right people at the right time. I think that's something that's really, really been remarkable about your journey,
sure.
right?
No, absolutely. Sometimes timing is everything, but you know, it helped to have the right environment to make it happen, right? And that's really what it's about.
Exactly. I was reading, I have read it earlier too, and with reference to this interview, I was reading that article, Maps Are Now Mine Again. Though it's old, but how would you currently describe the importance of paper maps and the kind of evolution maps have gone through in general?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for the mapping world itself, especially in the last 15 to 20 years. Remarkable changes that have gone on there. You know, that article, I hope, still stands up in many ways, because what it's at its root was about was that like a lot of manufacturing world, and the paper maps were part of that, was really around the idea that the only way to make a product viable was to make thousands and thousands of the same thing and get it out to people. What had started to change was that new technologies, both software that we could use, but also in the manufacturing world in terms of whether it's printing, 3D printing stuff is coming along now, other things allow for it to be viable to manufacture one unit of something and sell it. So, you know, the idea of a custom map that someone could get of their own property, or something even, you know, just looking not too far down the horizon, maybe even something like, imagine if you had a cottage in the mountains and you could get a little 3D print of that in your own coffee table. I mean, that's not that far away. So those are radically different from the world of the hundreds of thousands of units that the publishing world has traditionally manufactured in this business. So it's changed a lot. And of course, at the same time, a lot of the principles of cartographic principles, I guess, that underpinned a lot of the printed map business are making their way into the technology realm. And we see that too, where it's an interesting combination where you see that the history, the cartographic expertise that was really born in a lot of the traditional map making is starting to marry up with the technology that came from a whole other part. And they're coming together. And so you see this really, and that's why you're seeing more and more maps and more beautiful maps online and digitally that used to be really the domain of the printed product. So it's an interesting evolution we're seeing happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it blends, this discussion blends completely with the next question I had for you. Like, everything seems to be so easily available in the form of software application, and it's increased user friendliness. So what does this mean for someone as a cartographer, a GIS analyst, or more fundamentally, a geographer? How can these roles evolve to match the new era of map making?
That's a great question too. It's an important one for all of us in this business. It's funny, I remember, I think it was at a conference at Where 2.0, which happened just after Google Maps hit the scene, and that just shook everything up when that happened. I remember that. I think every business owner in the geo realm lost about a week of productivity from their team as everybody poured through Google Maps to see what this one was all about. But out of that came all this, it was an interesting term. I never really liked it, but there was this term called neo-geographers that came out of that, which was people that started being able to put stuff on maps. And so they were just putting dots and things, creating things on top of it. But I think what the idea behind the NeoGeographer was that it was people who didn't have a lot of expertise were starting to make maps. And it was a bit of almost a pushback on it to say, you know, this isn't real mapping, right? And so I always had a hesitancy on it. I mean, people make maps and always have made maps, right? I mean, my daughter at Easter, a number of years ago, when she was 3 years old, just figured that it was better that she make a map so the Easter Bunny could put her eggs in the right spots so that she wouldn't lose any. You know, she's 3 years old, she's making maps, right? Dad's real proud, of course, but the point is, like, people make maps across the spectrum. And so technology is making that easier for people to do. The flip side of that is we know that there's a lot of not so good maps that get made because of this. But what I've seen is, I think if you think of the paper map business, that's hundreds of years old, right? So it took a long time for that cartographic art and craft to really be created. The technology side is much younger, and the tools are really primitive at the beginning. But you see in the sort of industry side of things some signs that the role of the cartographer is becoming increasingly important. An example that comes to mind is a lot of us, you might remember that when Apple came out to big fanfare to their Maps application, was the new version of iOS that came out. Everybody ran up to get it, check this thing out. And it was a flop, right? It was just that the problems, and a lot of it came down to cartographic issues that were problematic with what was there. And people didn't necessarily know it was cartography, but they just knew it was wrong. But what a lot of people don't realize is Apple, after that, made a big hiring pitch, and they hired a lot of cartographers, right? They recognized that this was not okay, and they needed to raise the bar. And it wasn't going to happen from just somebody in design. It wasn't going to happen from technologists. They needed cartographers. Actually, a lot of our members lost some of their good people to Apple because of that. And I think that's a good thing, not for members, but I think it's a good thing because it's that raising of the bar. So to me, I really think, you know, especially for people, you know, new coming into the business, getting it, the fundamentals of the trade are just critical, right? Like, understand it's not about the technology comes, you know, always had to be on top of the technology, but understanding, you know, even when I went back to school 25 years ago now, you know, the fundamentals of cartography, of GIS data and raster vector projections, all these things are really, really essential concepts that once you learn the technology, you can apply them and they stick with you, right? Those concepts don't go away. And then staying on top of that craft, right, is where it is in there. I just fundamentally believe the role of the cartographer is only going to grow. And this is very consistent too with other spheres of other industries. There's a sort of movement towards where an emphasis on where art meets technology, right, where art meets science. I mean, this is it, right? Cartography is where that happens. And so I think for our cartographers that maybe sometimes get discouraged to think, is there a role for me? I tell you, I think especially if you look broadly, right, not just at a printed map like I got behind me on there, but if you look at it in terms of all of visualization that happens for maps, doing that well is going to take some expertise. And, you know, if Apple Story is any indication, there's going to be plenty of demand for it.
Yeah, no, that's a great, you know, what I get out of this conversation is that technology will be gradual, it'll come and go, but cartography will always be a craft, and it's a skill that will always need to be in, you know, in the industry. So that's a great point. And the last question is a little fun question. So if you had a crystal ball and you could see 25 years into the future, what does the global mapping industry look like in 2046?
Yeah, well, you know, it's always, I have to say, everybody, usually people hold me back and say, Dave, one day at a time, or maybe 1 year, but 25 years, it gets to really have some fun with this one. So, you know, I think I'm going to shy away from talking about specific technologies because, I mean, technologies themselves change, but I think there's some overriding trends that we see already and are really long-term trends. So I think you'll see them come, that really we'll see in their full fruition. So I mean, certainly globalization continues to play a big role in terms in our business, and maybe we come back to that in a second where that comes from. I mean, I think of our universe has sort of the globalization aspect to it, where we're no longer just in each of our countries or each of our regions. There's specialization, so there's a lot of people who become really specialists in different parts of the geospatial industry and business. But at the same time as we have that, we have a business that's inherently very local, right? And so this is sort of the uniqueness of the industry. So I kind of see over those 25 years, we're going to have a really interesting business ecosystem kind of grow out of that, right? Where you're going to have some, especially technology players that, you know, obviously we think today software companies like Esri or maybe like data providers like Maxar or Here or TomTom, and these kinds of providers are going to be everywhere. But then around that, what's key is kind of what happens with that. And there's going to be, well, how does this get applied into forestry, healthcare, real estate? There's going to be, you know, drone data. I mean, you look at autonomous vehicles and the application of this stuff. So there's all this niche specialized knowledge that has to come into play. And then finally combined with very local information, right? So that the big global players aren't going to provide. So when you put all that together, I really think you're going to see a very highly integrated global ecosystem of companies and network that's going to happen there, right? So where you'll see, and you know, to come back to sort of where we started on this, you know, that is for me the real role for where IMIA can play a really important function there, because the question is, someone who's applying this very sophisticated mapping technology into, say, the forestry sector. So they're nominally in the forestry business, but they're really kind of the geospatial people in the forestry world. But where are they going to go to get the relationships for other geotechnology, data, you know, other relationships to help get that out to other parts of the world in terms of distribution? Where's that going to come from? That's kind of the role where IMIA can play, right? And so it is to help forge those types of relationships and connections. And it's very clear, right? This industry is heading in those directions. Those themes are happening. So it's going to, for companies to be successful in the future, they're going to have to forge partnerships. No one company is going to dominate this space. There's too many aspects to it. And so the only way you're going to be successful is partnerships. And so that's kind of, you know, how it manifests itself. It will be in many ways, but I think those fundamental trends or the nature of the industry is going to be reflected with that.
That's amazing. These were some great insights, and you know, gives me a lot of hope as a GIS professional. So yeah. We're here to stay, right?
Oh, I tell you, I'm very, very optimistic about where this is all headed. So I think it's going to take us a little while to kind of figure it all out, but as anything. But if you look at these things in the right time frame too, I think year to year it can be sometimes, or even day to day, it's rough. But when you look at that longer horizon, there's a lot of great stuff happening here. So it's an exciting place to be.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you for spending time on this. And these were some very interesting trends and insights to know. And I know that our community will certainly benefit from this video. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tanya, as well. Glad to be able to share some of this with everybody, and hope it's can help people along their journey in the geospatial universe. It's a great place to be.